Before we get to the episode, we want you, dear listener, to ask yourself a question. What have you done these past 2 years? You know, the pandemic hit us all really hard. What have you really done other than perfect that matzo ball soup recipe of yours? Nothing. Now, we all want to add purpose and meaning to our life, and we have the way to really, really make your dreams come true. If you're listening, you're likely interested in Israel with hopes of traveling here soon. Well, lucky for you, we've got the scoop on Masa Israel Journey. With an amazing range of life-changing opportunities in Israel, Masa has many, many programs. They've got gap year programs, academics, internships, volunteering, and careers. The pandemic didn't stop them either, promoting options to study remotely while living in Israel. You don't have to be fluent in Hebrew or break your bank account. They even supply partial funding so you can make a positive impact on the world. You can fuel your passion and you can make your travel dreams a reality. Go to masaisrael.org and find out more. This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
In collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com. This weekend, 2 earthquakes hit Israel. Luckily, they weren't too strong, only 4 on the Richter scale. They were nothing compared to the level 10 earthquake that hit the news. In a series of articles published in the Kalkalist newspaper, Tomer Ganon revealed that the Israeli police used Pegasus, sophisticated offensive cybersecurity software, to hack into the phones of numerous Israeli citizens illegally. Among the victims of this alleged illegal espionage are mayors, ex-PM Netanyahu staffers, and even average Joes. It was also claimed that the police used the software to hack into a political activist's phone, where they found he was using Grindr, a gay dating app, which could be used to extort him as he's a married man. His sin? Protesting against the government. The articles sent shockwaves throughout Israel, and while the police chiefs and Minister of Internal Security themselves denied everything, evidence shows otherwise. If true, what are the implications of those actions? What are the legal claims of the police? Does the Israeli law permit the use of such software against Israeli citizens? And under what circumstances? To answer all these questions, we have with us today one of Israel's leading experts in the fields of law and the digital sphere, Professor Michael Bernhack. Professor Bernhack is a professor of law at Tel Aviv University. He researches, teaches, and writes about intellectual property, privacy law, information law, and law and technology. We're super, super thrilled to have Professor Bernhack on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Wow, you killed me with that one, man. You wrote a long one.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it's only proper.
Yeah. So thank you. How are you?
Thank you for coming.
Doing
I'm
good?
fine. Cold evening night here in Tel Aviv, and let's see how our conversation goes.
You don't
Enjoying
seem too shocked by this news. You seem like you took it all right.
I was shocked and not shocked.
Okay.
We have seen the Israeli police do things without authorization before. So in that sense, I'm not that surprised. But it was shocking to see that the police has used it, according to Kalkalist, according to the newspaper, against, political targets, rather than just, the typical terrorist objects of police and, serious crime, etc. And then I was surprised to see how the police initially denied everything and then started, telling other stories.
Yeah.
And
twitching. They were twitching.
Zigzagging, twitching. And, every day. And Kalkalist probably knew exactly what was going on. So they, over the next few days, they have been publishing new items And it seems that the police is just lying or not.
They're leaking like a...
Yeah. And
They played a smart game, Kalkalis, right? Because they
Right.
probably expected to get a certain response and then release a new piece of information that kind
Yeah.
of unveiled that they were lying.
And the police reaction was very amusing because their initial reaction was, we never heard of this. It probably never happened. If you, Kalkalis, the newspaper, think otherwise, please give us the expose
Your sources.
your sources,
Yeah.
give them to us, and we promise to take good care of them.
Of
yeah,
course.
we won't hack their phones or anything.
Of
It's
course.
just ridiculous.
And also the Minister of, what's it called? Internal Security or
Yeah.
something like that.
The police minister, essentially.
Basically also initially denied and expressed deep confidence in whatever the police has said, and that also has not
Yes.
turned out very
They
well.
assured me, he said, they reassured me that
Yeah.
this never happened.
Yeah. And the Attorney General was dragged into that. We can talk about that later on as well.
So, what's the problem as far as you're concerned with
Maybe,
what the
maybe give us a breakdown kind of like the main allegations and the main like problems with those.
So NSO is an Israeli company which acts globally, and it's quite controversial, as we know. They have developed Pegasus, which is a kind of a spyware. We do not exactly know everything that it does because it's part of the thing, that it's a bit secret, it's also trade secret, I guess, etc. But to the extent that we do know something about Pegasus, it reaches your phone somehow, probably by an innocent email that you open or click on something that you shouldn't have clicked on, etc. And then it basically takes over your phone without the user's phone, without him or her knowing what's going on. And the phone or the device becomes transparent to whoever's on the other side. Now, NSO is quite controversial. They keep saying, we only develop technology and we sell it. It's nothing, we do not do anything illegally. And whenever we learn that some government or our client has used it in an illegal way, we immediately stop that. So that is what they say. They have denied, NSO has denied in the past that they have sold the devices to Israel or that they target Israeli citizens.
or American.
Or American, exactly. And now the Kalkalist story, Tomer Ganon's scoop, is that the Israeli police has used Pegasus against Israelis. And at this point, it's quite unclear who exactly were the targets of this use. Mayors, probably so. The police has sort of admitted that it has used it against mayors, 3 mayors who were suspect of some sort of corruption and were never charged, by the way, these 3 at least, and their family members, or at least some of their family members. The police denies the use against the activists, the demonstrators, and about everything else, they haven't yet said how many. They said a few dozens a year, but that can be few and can be many. They have said that they do not use it against innocent people, which makes me wonder. Kind of, it's as far as I remember, it's the court's
Exactly.
role to say who's innocent and who's not, rather than the police.
Right. Also,
That's crazy.
I mean, they basically... Never mind, I lost my train of thought.
That's
but
just crazy,
yeah.
though. That we have to stop on that. We
Yeah.
only use it against innocent people. It's just
Right.
insanity.
Now, the police is obviously an important body. It's here to protect all of us and our personal security and safety and all of that, and prevent crime. And if crime has occurred, to catch the bad guys and all of that. However, in a democracy, we sort of, we have this strange idea that the government, including the police, do not have absolute power. They have only the authorities that we, as the public, have awarded them. And in my opinion, and many of my colleagues in the legal field, the police does not have currently any authority under Israeli law to use spyware of this kind. They can approach a court and ask for an order for metadata, communications data, That means who spoke with whom, including location, which is very important. And this has become standard in almost any investigation.
And wiretapping.
And they also have the authority to approach a district court, the president of the district court, so it's a high court, and ask for wiretapping order.
But even with wiretapping, I want to stop on that for a second, because I want to ask you some questions there. I mean, all of my knowledge comes from The Wire and Sopranos, so it's not very legitimate knowledge. Yeah. But what I remember, if they did their research on that show, is that a lot of the times, like wiretapping is actually, first of all, you have to. They had to, for example, in one of the shows, I can't even remember, prove that a lot of the interactions were happening actually in that room that they tapped.
Yeah.
So there was even more onus of proof to put a tap in that specific spot. And also there was this requirement to only listen to a few seconds of the phone call, and if there is an indication that a crime is being spoken about, then you can continue. Meaning it always seems like, and again, that this is granted that any of this is actually true, it always seems like there's a very heavy onus of proof to establish that you can even go further in opening up the privacy of the person.
Right. So, The Wire and The Sopranos, etc., those TV series and movies and all of those, they are under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which requires something along the lines that you have said. Initially, the police, the FBI, or whatever agency over there, they have to go to the court and say, we have something. And just a general suspicion is not good enough. And it's the same over here for wiretapping. The police has to, and it has to be a high-ranking police officer approaching the president of the district court, which over here is the second instance rather than the first. And they have to say something. And a fishing expedition is not good enough. A judge should not award a wiretapping order based on we don't like that guy. We want to find something that shouldn't be working. However, these procedures are obviously, as we can imagine, secret. Wiretapping is covert. Otherwise, it's quite useless. And statistics that were published over the last few days indicates, and this is statistics that we are familiar with for many years, that judges approve 99.9% of the requests, of the police requests for wiretapping.
Like they do with the gag orders and
exactly.
many other,
And it's not transparent, obviously, and it's quite rare that we actually know what exactly goes on there. Now, such an order can set some conditions and limitations, such as listen only for a few seconds, or if a member of the family picks up the phone and he or she speak, you should not be listening and not be recording. You can set lots of conditions, but there is no real checks and balances over that, unless eventually someone is charged and it becomes part of the evidence, and then the court may see that what exactly has happened.
Assuming the police did file to the judge
a request.
Yeah.
Under which law that request would have been approved?
So we have the wiretap. We have a few laws over here. So one of them is the Wiretapping Act. That is the one that I've been mentioning, and it's from 1979. So it's quite old, not as old as me, but it's quite old. And then we have the Communications Data Act. That's a newer one, but it is limited only to communication data. And there's also a General Search Act that regulates, searches into houses and places like that. None of these allow using spyware, and we don't have the Fourth Amendment, but we do have the basic law, Human Dignity and Liberty from 1992, which is sort of a constitution over here. And Section 7 says that, I'm translating from Hebrew, but every person has privacy, or should have privacy. That's what it says, generally speaking. It's quite constitutional. It's very broad and not very specific. But that means that the police have only the power that has been explicitly given to them. And in order to basically violate our fundamental right to privacy, they need explicit authorization. And they don't have that for spyware. If they do wish to have it, they should go to the Knesset and, suggest through the ministry and government, etc., suggest new legislation.
Or, with our system of judiciary system, if this gets to the Supreme Court can decide that indeed the current law can be considered as a digital.
The Israeli Supreme Court does undertake relatively broad interpretation of laws. That's true. But I doubt it. I cannot imagine, based on their precedents, on our justices' precedents, I cannot imagine them finding authorization for such a thorough violation of fundamental basic rights such as privacy.
Although,
exactly.
If we're talking about this basic law of כבוד האדם וחירותו, the man's
human dignity
and freedom, it's a Swiss cheese by now, because point 6 in the law says a citizen can leave, the sixth segment of the law says, if I'm not mistaken, a citizen can leave Israel. And we've seen that citizens couldn't leave Israel, for example. So it wouldn't be the first article of the law to be dismantled.
So under Israeli law, we as citizens and residents, for those of us who are not citizens, we do enjoy some human rights, such as equality and freedom of speech and freedom of demonstration and the right to movement and leave the country and enter the country, etc., and privacy, and a few other rights, of course, due process. None of these rights is considered to be absolute, unlike the First Amendment in the United States, or unlike human dignity in Germany. And the court has always, even before this basic law was enacted, the court has always engaged in balancing. And has developed a very sophisticated system of balancing, how to balance what against what, etc. The basic law has in Article 8 a general balancing formulation. And for those who are familiar maybe with the European system, it's quite similar to the European system, both in the European Union and in the under the European Convention of Human Rights of the Council of Europe, which is two different bodies. If the violation, the human rights violation, is done by a law, meaning that there's a specific authorization, and that law is for a legitimate aim, a good cause, such as prevention of crime, etc., and it fits the values of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic country, whatever that means. So sometimes there are huge debates about that, especially in religious issues or national debates, but not regarding police. And the violation should not exceed what is needed, basically a proportionality test. So there's a lot of balancing going on. But I believe that the use of the spyware should fail on the first item. There is no law authorizing the use of such spyware. And if the Supreme Court finds otherwise, well, Who
are we?
Exactly. They make the supreme law of the land.
Could the problem stem from the fact that we don't have anything even near absolutes in Israeli law, meaning the fact that we have this complex balancing system which creates this almost like complex bureaucratic logic formula for whether or not you're allowed to do something,
it's we find that in most, if not all, democracies. Even I said earlier that the First Amendment in the United States is an absolute. It's not, because when the Americans when they meet something that they don't want to protect, so they would say, well, instead of balancing, which we don't do, they say we don't do balancing, they say, you know what, this is not speech. So filthy words, there's a list of seven words which are considered filthy words. Or obscenity, that's not considered speech in the US. If something is indecent, it is. So pornography is okay, but obscene is not, and then they have the debates, what is obscene and what is indecent. So we have chosen a different system, which is more in line with the European, Canadian systems. And we live in a complex society. There are lots of public interests of public order and national security, of course, over here, and efficiency of the government, and you name it. Sometimes you have to, shut down the road because there's a demonstration. So in order to enable the one side or some people to protest, that's their freedom of speech, you limit other people's right to drive freely or walk freely in the street or whatever. And under COVID, yes, there are lots of restrictions, now less than before, but we have had, we stayed at home, everybody, and we couldn't move, go out more than 100 meters. That's not a lot. So there's a lot of balancing going on, and I think it's inevitable in any democratic complex society, which Israel is part of, for good or for
So
bad.
where do you see the issue stemming from? Like, where did this all start, and why do you think it is, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's for, we definitely need an objective external form of inquiry that would look into that. Currently, the police is investigating itself. Good luck. The Attorney General has also established some sort of internal inquiry committee, but that's quite ridiculous because the Attorney General and his office are also part of the picture as far as I'm concerned. So I don't really know what exactly the police were thinking. Maybe
Or the judges who signed.
Or the judges, kind of, and that's a mystery. One option is that the police genuinely thought that they do have the authority. Maybe they got some legal advice about that. And, they were under the impression that what they're doing is okay. That's one option. Another is that they knew that they are not exactly authorized. And then did they, tell stories to the judges? Maybe, I hope not, because that would be really terrible if they lie to the court. Maybe they told the courts and the judges everything, and maybe the judges are the ones to blame because, for not understanding the technology.
Or not understanding the law.
Or, or misconstruing the law. That's also an option. So, there are many options here. And another option, of course, is that police knew exactly that what they are doing and that they do not have the authority, but have done that. There are many questions.
In
at
Israel,
this
you
point.
have a thing called Shitat Matzriach,
Yeah.
which is maybe hard to translate, but in essence, it means you try, and worst case scenario, you fail. But most likely, nobody will notice.
Yeah.
And then you got what you needed.
So it might be the case. Now, the police is under huge pressure to solve crime, and we have our share of issues, right? And criminal activity. So, they're under huge pressure from the public and from the government and the ministers. Every minister wants to show that he has managed, it's mostly he, I think, in that department, has managed to, take down the numbers of criminal
a woman
activities.
is the head of the... She went to the media as the head of the cyber force in the police.
Well, yeah.
Just for the record.
Mm-hmm. I was talking about the ministers, but yeah.
Okay.
But so there's a lot going on here, and there are many questions, and someone should be asking them. So everybody's asking, but the formal inquiry.
That's the thing, because here in Israel, if a judge commits a crime, who will investigate? It's a big question, and if the Attorney General commits a crime, that's even.
I wouldn't go to. I wouldn't characterize what may have happened here as a crime by the judges or the Attorney General.
Yeah,
at most, they have exceeded their authority and powers.
Right.
Which happens every now and then, and whenever we find out about it, they should be back into their limits. But
although if the head of the police,
yeah, well,
I mean, is that really, like, if a basic law, if a basic civil liberty was transgressed by
intentionally,
but then shouldn't the people responsible for that be held accountable? I mean, shouldn't it be considered a crime?
If someone has done so deliberately, which is unlikely to be the Attorney General or judges, if someone has knowingly done something illegally, it may be only, in this case, only the police. And, it's under investigation. So as far as I'm concerned, they are all innocent until proven differently otherwise. So in that case, yes, I do expect if at the end of the day, we will find out that there was a police officer who knew that he or she are not allowed to do whatever, what we're talking about, and nevertheless they have done and misled the courts, etc. So they should be discharged and prosecuted, etc. Of course, but that's we are not yet there. There's at this point more questions than answers for us to be able to kind of point fingers and send people to jail.
So if Pegasus, for example, according to what you're saying, is there should be zero legal basis for Pegasus to be used by the police against Israeli citizens. So if that's the case, then there must have been someone who, one, requested for it to be used, and two, someone to approve it to be used. Yeah. So, I mean, those people should be investigated.
I think they should be investigated, and but the result may be that they made a mistake. Without malice, kind of, not deliberately misled anybody. Just, they thought that they have the authority and power, and, it turns out that they haven't. But once again, it's too early to know what exactly happened there. And we will probably be the last to know, because it will take time, if at all. Yeah.
But many of the claims are right that the last police chief right now, it's what's his name?
I forgot also.
Shabtai.
Yeah.
And the previous police chief was Roni El-Sheikh.
Yeah.
And many of the claims are that he came from the Shabak, which is like the Israeli FBI. He was the, I think, vice director or whatever. And that he brought with him some kind of culture of, basically overstepping their legal boundaries, because the Shabak is so often dealing with non-citizens,
and the Shabak, the Shin Bet, they do have the authority, by the way, to use quite intrusive technologies. Typically, these are used against terrorists or people who are suspect of terrorist activities,
or people who are in contact with COVID.
Oh, well,
we should talk about that maybe later.
So typically those tools have been used in the West Bank against Palestinians who are suspect of terrorist activity. And unfortunately, that has crossed the line, the green line, and has entered into the Israeli society with the police. And that, by the way, is something that we have seen a few of these cases. For example, biometrics. The use of biometrics for, documenting the population, that started in Gaza, when Gaza was still under Israeli rule or occupation, choose your preferences, and then extended to the West Bank, and then extended in Israel to asylum seekers and foreign employees, as we call them, if that's the term, and now to the entire Israeli population, according to a law. So first, the technologies has been applied and sort of experimented on other populations, and then it reaches us. And the same seems to be the case with Pegasus. And the next technology, by the way, which begins making its way into the Israeli state and culture, is biometric cameras. So the CCTV cameras, which we have more and more of them all over the place, they can now, the technology is here. They can be connected to biometric database, which we have according to the Biometric Act. And that means that when you walk in the street and you think that, you enjoy some sort of anonymity, that camera, which is connected to the database, can identify
Like in China. Like they do in China.
Like they do in China, exactly, with under the social grade system. That
Credit,
they have.
yeah.
Credit, yeah.
Yeah.
And according to foreign press, as we like to say over here, that system is used in the West Bank for quite some time. And so we see once again sort of the kind of, movement or infiltration.
Truth
of
is,
technologies.
it's terrifying because we're at a point where we're not quite there, but you mentioned mind reading, and we're at a point where you can start putting the pieces together where we will be there. Like, right? Because I don't know if you guys, Neuralink.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you saw
Elon
this
Musk.
video. Elon Musk started developing Neuralink. It's basically planted a chip in a monkey's brain. And there's a video online. It's quite amazing. You can see the monkey in front of a game of Pong,
Mm-hmm.
and he's controlling it with a joystick they taught him to play. And then at some point they basically disconnect the joystick, and they've developed this chip which transmits the monkey's thoughts to direct the Pong game. So the basically the monkey is using his mind to play the
Right.
game. So eventually that will be available for people.
Yeah. But for
And
Michael,
then it
it's
could
good
be
news
hacked
because
by the government.
Michael listened to this and he's like, "Oh my, I have work till I'm retired."
Well, I'd rather spend some time on researching history of copyright law and trademark law in Mandate Palestine, which is also something I do. So that's more fun. No debates over there, or the debates are settled sort of somehow.
Much easier, much simpler.
But if we were to agree that such a law that permits the police to do such things should exist, how would you legislate such a law?
Well, that's a debate, by the way. Kind of a few of us in the privacy circles, there aren't that many
Privacy
of us.
nerds.
There aren't that many of us over here, but there are a few, and we are growing. We have discussed that among us, some of us. Should we author and suggest a law, because we would write it better, of course, right? Or should we sort of, abstain and let the government and the Knesset do whatever they do, and it will be so bad we will take it, or someone will take it to the Supreme Court and challenge its constitutionality. It's always a debate whether to join or not to join such efforts. Now, personally, I probably will not join because I'm busy with other things. But, it's definitely a challenge how to authorize technologies when needed and make sure that they are used only when needed, with various measures of proportionality to make sure that it's only used in really serious crime, and that there's real judicial scrutiny rather than just a judge kind of stamping all the requests next and okay and get out of here sort of attitude.
But intellectually, there is no big difference between tapping your conversations over the phone and tapping your texts over the phone, right?
The Wiretapping Act allows also tapping conversations, WhatsApp, etc. Whatever's a conversation, whether it's sound or text, that's a conversation that's already covered. But the spyware program, as the software, as far as we know, it does way more than that. First, it does that, so wiretapping, etc. That's kind of the basic level, and then according to what we know, it enables the police or whoever is using the technology to access files that you may have. Now, our phones, our smartphones, or whatever they're called, they contain our lives. Whatever, we receive an email from the doctors with a file. We download it. It's on the phone. It's there. We send files, etc. Applications, apps, Tinder, Grindr, whatever, those kind of apps, everything is there. And, I hate to break the news, but young people, so I'm told, they take lots of intimate photos and they share them with friends, not with the police and others, but it's in the phone. And whatever, just take each of the listeners, take your smartphone, open it up, and just browse, scroll down and see what you have there. It's everything. Our medical information, our financial, we do our banking using those devices, right? Our romance, our sexual lives, everything is there. Conversations are, they're sort of the kind of the superficial level.
So with wiretapping and listening into listening to conversations and seeing messages, are there any limitations? Are there any levels, right? Like at first you just get one stamp of approval and you have access to all messages and all conversations?
So the wiretapping order that the judge issues should say for how long the wiretapping is allowed, to whom. So if more than one person uses the same phone line, once upon a time when we had landlines,
78.
it mattered more. But today everyone has their own device. But so the judge in the order should say for how long, to whom you may listen and wiretap, and for which purposes. So if the person speaks with his or her lawyer, that you should not be listening, etc. So the order should say what's allowed and what is not allowed in that.
But so long as
regard.
he's talking with a pizza delivery guy, you can listen to the whole conversation. Doesn't matter.
Probably so, kind of, because that's the thing with fishing. When the police engages in fishing expeditions, as far as they're concerned, it's not really the pizza guy that I called. It's actually my drug dealer, and we are using code. Get me, 2 pizzas, one with this and one with that topping, and it's actually a code for drugs. But that's police work.
Okay. And with messages, then they're supposed to. I mean, I can't imagine that they can type in "don't download the lawyer messages." So they get all the messages and then they're supposed to supposedly sift through them.
And they're supposed to ignore it.
Yeah, of course.
And here enters a recent Supreme Court case about the Urich case, which was decided by 9 justices, which is unusual over here, unlike the United States, and of the Supreme Court. And we can delve into that case in a second, but basically, one of its important rulings is that if the police has engaged in an illegal search, they can then apply to approach the court and ask for a legal order. In retrospect, and that will sort of, whitewash the illegality of the previous search.
That's nice.
That's nice.
Whereas
for the police.
in the States, that would be considered the fruit of the poison tree.
Exactly, and that we see that a lot in American movies and The Wire, etc. If the police has done one mistake in the way they have obtained the evidence, everything is gone, and the murderer goes free, right? And the drug dealers go free. They.
That's how we got 5 seasons of The Wire, by the way.
Exactly.
But in Israel, you don't have fruits of the poison tree.
We don't have that.
In Israel, it'd be a very short series.
Yeah.
You 20-minute episode. The police wins in the beginning. That's it. It's all over.
Yeah. There are very limited rules of disqualifying evidence. One of them, by the way, is with wiretapping, but so that evidence will be disqualified. But then the police can approach the court for a new wiretap, and now they know exactly what they're looking for, right? Because they've already seen.
So that's what happened in the Urich case?
More or less. So the Urich case. Jonathan Urich and Mr. Golan. Ophel, okay. They are or were Urich studies, and Golan I do not know. They were one of the Prime Minister's Netanyahu staff. And as everybody I'm sure knows, Mr. Netanyahu is standing trial for various corruption allegations. One of the witnesses, Mr. Filber, who was for a short while the General Director of the Ministry of Communication, he is a key witness in Netanyahu's trial. Okay, so there's Netanyahu's trial. Filber is one of the witnesses. Filber was harassed. Allegedly, of course. No, someone has harassed him. We do not know who. Driving a car outside his home and sort of, trying to influence, that's the allegation, his testimony. Now, that's a crime in itself. And the police has suspected that Mr. Urich and Mr. Golan have something to do with that. So they call them for an investigation. Let's have tea, as one of my Chinese colleagues says. When someone calls you and asks you, let's have tea, so that's a bad indication.
Yeah.
You better pack a big bag. Okay, so they were called for an investigation, and as the investigation started, the police officers asked them separately whether they can hand their smartphones, which they have. So they have done so. They gave their phones, but they were not warned that the police is about to enter, and check the phones and what's inside. I
think they were even asked by the police to give the code to the phone.
Probably so,
And,
but they were not. They had no prior warning of what's going on, and then the police saw whatever they saw, and then the police, with that information, approached the court once again, the magistrate court, and said, "Hey, we have serious allegations against these suspicions and allegations against these guys. We need a court order to search their phones," which they have already done. So obviously, when Ulrich and Golan learned about that, they have challenged that. That has reached. It went up and down the courts with appeals, etc. And the Supreme Court has dealt with that about almost a year ago in a 3-justice panel, and then there was a rehearing with 9 justices, which is quite unusual. And the decision was handed down last week. It's quite complex. It's quite long. It's 132 pages to be.
You read the whole thing?
I read it twice.
What a geek! What a privacy geek!
Well, and it's complex,
the
and
gist
it has many
TLDR
issues.
for us.
But one of the main findings is that this behavior on behalf of the police behavior, it's not okay, but we do approve. And the first search was illegal, but nevertheless, the second search order is legal and is okay, and they may proceed.
Wow.
Any allegations against the legality of the evidence, which were obtained in this manner, should be decided by the court if and when Mr. Ulrich and Mr. Golan will stand trial for whatever it is. Now, many cases
Harassing
do
a
not.
state witness.
Yeah, many cases, people are investigated, but there is no trial at the end. There was.
But that's a precedent.
It's a precedent. One justice was only one out of the 9 dissented, Justice Elron. I side with him. With all due respect, I believe that the 8 justices, including the Chief Justice, has erred on this decision. They have clearly preferred the police investigation needs of a quick investigation, an efficient one, a covert investigation in many cases. They have stated that. They have preferred that to privacy. They have mentioned privacy, they have mentioned the basic law, but then they turn to balancing of various kinds. And they said, proportionality. There's a judge at the magistrate court level who reviews any police request for search orders. And that judge should be informed whether there was a prior illegal search, yes or no, and they should take that into consideration, albeit not a major consideration. And for the Supreme Court, that's a good enough check. I beg to differ.
Basically delegating in a way. They're saying this isn't big enough for us.
Well, they have spent, the 9 justices and such a long decision, so they did look into the matter, but they have definitely made sure that no such cases will reach them in the near future.
But that encapsulates the problem in a sense, because it feels, I think, here in Israel that the police and the judiciary system is in cahoot, and
Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. There are too many cases on both sides of that argument, so it's difficult to kind of side with. To reach a clear statement about that. I would be more careful with that.
Let me challenge the specific, because if they did give their phones over voluntarily and they did give their passcodes over voluntarily, isn't that enough of an indication that they are voluntarily giving up their right to privacy? I mean, if I give you my phone and I tell you the passcode,
Well, Ethan, I believe I'm an innocent guy and a law-abiding citizen, but nevertheless, when I see a police officer on the street and they look at me, I'm sort of kind of what's going on, kind of, and when they approach me, if they approach me, and I'm a law professor, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I don't even cross in the red light, it's quite scary, and whatever consent there is here, it's not freely given. There's a difference of power, and you don't mess up with police officers because you don't want to make them angry, because the next thing you will be arrested or whatever, and good luck.
But there's no explicit threat. I mean, if there was an explicit threat, then it's obviously problematic. But the claim that I'm intimidated by the police, if I was actually intimidated, meaning if he drew his weapon or if he showed me his weapon and said you might want to give me that phone, then yeah, of course. But if he said, could I see your phone?
There's an investigation. There's a big power imbalance
there's a huge power imbalance. Kind of, it's very difficult to say no to the police officer. What would I say? No, I know the law, and you are not allowed to do that. If you have a court order, I will. But until you have a court order, I'm going away. Many people
in the States, I think a lot of the times the police simply ask to search your vehicle, and if they find something, then I think it's admissible, right? Like you have to say, no, I don't want you to search my vehicle.
I do follow Fourth Amendment jurisprudence and U.S. Supreme Court on that matter, but I don't feel comfortable with that.
But in an investigation in America, you can have a lawyer with you throughout the investigation, which I think they didn't have. I don't know how it works in Israel, but I don't think you have the right over here. You have the right to consult a lawyer, not necessarily in the investigation room. You cannot bring him with you to the room.
Yeah,
in the room you're by yourself.
But and Ulrich and Golan, they're quite sophisticated people, right? They're not just
the average Joe.
The average Joe, exactly. So, but nevertheless, even for them, it's intimidating, and there are all sorts of calculations. If I refuse, will it be held against me? And what will they make of it? And etc. And it's difficult to say no to the police.
I wanted to touch one last thing before we wrap this up. In the beginning of COVID, we were all panicking. And under that panic, it was decided to use yet again a tool from the territories, the tool of the Shabak, and to implement it on the entire population of Israel.
Yeah,
that raised a huge debate. What do you make? Can you explain a little bit? And what do you make of that?
So we are going back to late February, early March 2020, right?
Yes, 2020.
When the first COVID cases were diagnosed or found in Israel. And everybody was panicking, as you've said, etc. And it was quite obvious that this pandemic cannot be managed, and pandemics need to be managed. It cannot be managed like the Spanish flu over 100 years ago. And it's quite clear that information is an important tool in managing pandemics. So we've all become experts, right? With, how many sick people, how many new cases, what is the R, and all of, we have become experts. Okay. The Israeli government has correctly identified at the early stages of the pandemic that contact tracing is crucial. So if we know that a person is COVID positive, we want to identify, who he or she have been in touch with in close enough proximity, which means less than 2 meters, I think, and for more than 15 minutes. That was these were the stats at that time, at the beginning. And one way is to ask people. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were 27 nurses who were doing that job. When there were 1 or 2 or 5 cases, that was enough. But then, when there were thousands of cases, obviously they could not cope with it. It took about a year until the army, the IDF, has joined and, set facilities with
Call
Three-
centers.
call centers with 3,000 soldiers, basically, who were trained how to conduct these epidemiological
Now it's a WhatsApp
investigation.
chatbot, by the way.
Yeah. That's another issue.
Yeah.
No offense to chatbot technologists. And
I'm a chatbot technologist, and I was offended by the chatbot, so it's okay.
okay. Now there are many problems with that, other than human power. One of them is that I do not remember who are the people that I've seen in the last 2 weeks. I may remember some of them, but not everybody. Some of them I may just, there was that cashier in the supermarket, or the nice guy that I sat next to on the bus, but what are the
For that
names?
one night stand, I really want to tell you
Well,
about
exactly.
random soldier at a call center.
So there's a matter of trust, etc.
Yeah.
So the government has done two things in parallel. One is the use of the Shin Bet, the Shabak technology of tracing. So we have learned that they have that capability and that they are using it
It was secret.
and it was secret, but now it's no longer. And that they have been using it for security issues, of course, national security. That's their mission. And they were recruited to do the contact tracing.
Which basically means they used, yet again, a software.
It's, as far as we know, it's using data from our cell phone providers about our whereabouts,
Right.
and then matching them and figuring out who was in close proximity to whom. By the way, the Shin Bet was quite reluctant. So, they obeyed because they get orders and they obey. But they were reluctant and voiced their reluctancy inside the government and made it also public to some extent, because that has revealed the limits of their technology. For example, apparently it's not good enough in buildings to figure out if someone is on the first floor or 10th floor. The technology apparently is not good enough to figure that out. Okay, so the government has used the Shin Bet for contact tracing, and at the same time they have tried to develop an app. So I got a phone call from the Ministry of Health from someone I did not know. I didn't know anybody there. That was the first week of March, so really at the beginning. And they said, hey, we are trying to design an app that will do blah, 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 contact tracing. I said, wow, wonderful. What you're doing is what we privacy geeks call privacy by design, meaning designing the technology in a way that achieves its function, contact tracing, but in a way that protects privacy. And it's doable. It's difficult and challenging, but it's doable. And they asked my advice on the privacy aspects. And I think they have done amazing work there. Eventually it failed, but the
Because
thought...
no one would download the app.
Well, 1.5 million people have downloaded it initially and then removed it, because why bother if the Shin Bet conducts the same function anyway without an opt-out? Why should I bother doing an opt-in to a new technology? So,
How it works is you would get an SMS, basically,
yeah.
from the Shin Bet, basically, if you were in close proximity to someone who is a confirmed case of COVID.
Yeah. And then we had, it reached the Shin Bet contact tracing surveillance has reached the Supreme Court, which has said, well, authorization, not quite, but it's an emergency, so yeah, well, okay. But for a limited time. And they sent the government to try again, because initially it was under one law and then another law, etc. Eventually the government came
Always
up...
emergency laws, though.
Emergency laws. And then the government came up with a law which went through all the phases of the Knesset legislation, and that was approved. Then there was another challenge to the Supreme Court, which then said, we approve, but you, the government, may use this tool only if people refuse to cooperate in the human and humane epidemiological investigations, only in those cases. Otherwise, so it's a last resort sort of tool. And then sort of, that was probably the second wave of COVID, or maybe third, I'm not sure. So, the use, there was no longer it was no longer needed, and then we started getting the vaccinations, etc. And now when Omicron started, The government, and it's a different government now, including a left-wing Minister of Health, have once again used, they have reoperated the Shin Bet surveillance for 5 days. Once again, there was a Supreme Court challenge, and the Supreme Court gave its decision on the last and fifth day, and they approved. In the morning, they handed down the decision. In the evening, that has expired, the authorization, and it was not renewed.
Because of public pressure, maybe.
Public pressure, maybe, because this the current variant spread so fast.
Yeah,
maybe
we
it's
don't get
useless.
SMS all day long,
Yeah,
basically.
so-
But the line was crossed yet again.
Yeah.
Yet again, brings me back to the Swiss cheese argument.
Emergency is tough. I was very concerned with, and I still am concerned with the securitization of a civil crisis. COVID is a crisis, okay, all over the world. But it's a civil crisis. It's like an earthquake or, some other crisis a tsunami or things like that. Global warming, which in fires in California, etc. It's a civil crisis. And the use of security tools, which are highly developed over here, for solving or addressing that, I think it's not a good precedent. My concern is what is left for, the next crisis. There will be some crisis, unfortunately, earthquake or whatever, tsunami. I doubt it over here, but some other crisis will emerge at some point.
Yeah, but there's always an emergency here.
Yeah, don't you think that crisis is always, I think it was Friedrich Hayek who said that emergencies are always a great excuse for trampling, civil liberties.
Yeah, and that's why we have the law and the Supreme Court and basic laws and constitutions to try and
But
make
wouldn't
sure
you
that it's
like-
used only in, when it's really needed.
Wouldn't you like a law that's absolute or obsolete? Absolute, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that
The law's already obsolete.
Yeah.
Now we
Yeah.
need it absolute.
absolute that cannot be, chewed by any judge.
It's, it's...
An ultimate privacy law.
Right, I'm not fanatic. I do know that information is important. It's also important for the tax authorities and for the prevention of crime and terrorism, and for mundane things like the efficient government. If I move to a new place and I change my address, I want to do it once rather than 10 times with different agencies. There are lots of needs, and we do make some sort of compromises. They have to make sense. They have to be proportional. They have to be for good reasons rather than sort of cover various illicit motivations that someone may have.
But it seems
it's not easy.
If you have 2 minutes, because there is one thing that I forgot that I wanted us to discuss. It seems that the default is that the privacy is a privilege and not a right in Israel. And we saw that in this crisis, not only with the Shabak, but also there was I think a proposal for allowing, or maybe it actually passed down, for allowing the police to enter homes.
It's still somewhere
Yeah.
in the background. Yeah, we have moved to other
Yeah.
problems.
But the idea that would even be proposed, I mean, isn't
Right.
that like the idea that our privacy is not necessarily a given? It's
Right.
something that is nice in times of
Perk.
peace.
It's a perk you get
Yeah.
from the state.
Yeah. So let's be historical, but not hysterical and philosophical for a moment. Privacy is a relatively new right. Okay, it sort of has emerged as a legal right in the late 19th century. There's a famous law review article by Warren and Brandeis at the 4th volume of the Harvard Law Review, The Right to Privacy. And in the constitutional setting, it's a post-World War thing. Okay, because of the Nazis, when they occupied the Netherlands and other countries, one of the first things they have done was to take over their national registrations, which made their work, so to speak, in finding Jewish people and others very easy. So privacy as a constitutional right is by and large a post-World War II idea. So that's relatively new in the sphere of human rights. Over here in Israel, up until the late 70s, we were a socialist country. democracy, but socialist.
Some would say
Some would say that we are still, maybe. But, with very strong Eastern European roots and a socialist environment, one for all and all for one sort of ideas. Under that idea, privacy took a long time to sort of develop. It's exactly the Privacy Act is from 1981. The Wiretapping Act is from 1979. It's the same period. The Basic Law is 10 years later, 1992. So
interestingly enough, it's Likud government. First Likud government.
Yeah, of course, because they were not socialist or less socialist, at least. Some would. That's another debate. But they were not explicitly socialist, even though some fractions there were.
And yet the Likud government are the ones that trampled all these privacy rights in the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yes, but then, also the current government, which is not as right-wing as the Likud government, and Nitzan Horowitz is the Minister of Health, and he's from Meretz, a left-wing party, and he objected to the Shin Bet surveillance, contact tracing surveillance earlier, but when he was health minister, pressure took over, I guess.
He was following in the footsteps of his predecessors.
Well,
standing on the shoulders of giants.
I've helped bring those people into power, so I can't I have nobody else to complain to other than myself. But yeah, it's dire. It seems the situation is dire. Hopefully there's
it's challenging. It's okay. And
you seem like an optimistic man. What are you doing on this podcast? I don't know.
We shall overcome. It will be okay. Everything will be okay. Don't panic.
Okay.
I'm panicking.
Michael, do you have social media? Where can people follow you and reach out?
As a privacy guy, I'm not on Facebook because I don't think highly of that anti-social network.
Your WhatsApp photo is also moved to Signal.
Yeah, so I am on. I do have a WhatsApp account, but yes, I prefer Signal for privacy reasons. But it's difficult to abort everything. I'm on Twitter, Burnhack. Google me to Twitter me. I'm there and
tweeting in English also sometimes.
Sometimes, occasionally.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Really
guys.
appreciate
it. Was a pleasure.
We're neighbors after all, so maybe
Indeed.
we'll have you again in the future. We'd like that. Before we go, we are sponsored by Oltz Sheva. Check them out at israelnationalnews.com. Also by Australian Jewish News at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Yes. Also, what else? Masa, check out
What else?
Masa Israel guys, check them out also.
MasaIsraelJourney.org.
Yes.
MasaIsrael.org, and we accept donations. We do this on our free time, so if you want to help us out, to njb.com/donate.
And that is it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming. And guys, stay on your privacy.
Cheers. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.